Why, hello there, my fancy friend. It is Stephanie, and I am here with another episode of the Fancy Scientist podcast. Now, a few times a year, I open up a free training where I teach you the 3 essential pillars it takes to become a successful wildlife professional. And in the show notes of this episode, I will put the link so that you can make sure you're signed up. But I wanted to do some podcast episodes specifically on careers to get you warmed up to be talking about wildlife careers and some of the things to look out for. And recently, I came across a blog post describing careers, I believe it was in zoology, and it had a link to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics for zoology and wildlife biology careers. And I remember looking at this when I was considering being a wildlife biologist. And now that I've been a wildlife biologist for a really long time, I've been in this field since 2003, I want to talk about some things to look for on this website, which gives you a projection, it gives you an estimate of how much you can expect to make in these careers. So I'm going to talk about some of the caveats that I don't think they consider, because in my opinion, this number is high. And I'm going to talk to you about my own experience and my friend's experience and why I think that it's high. So this episode is a must listen to if you want to go into wildlife careers, because you have to pay attention to more things than just that number. There's so many more things that go into it. And I just want to have a general discussion about how a lot of the things that you read online about this career are, in fact, no longer true. So today I'm going to dissect the website page for zoology and wildlife biology careers in the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, but a lot of this information applies to other sources as well. I am so excited for you to hear the real deal about this. It's about time. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says that for zoologists and wildlife biologists, the median pay is $70,600 per year. And if you're not in the United States, I'm sorry, but there's probably a similar resource out there. And the data are probably skewed in a similar way as it is in the US, because the things I'm going to tell you today apply to wildlife careers in general all over the world. My students are from all over the world. I've helped them get jobs in all over the world. So all of this stuff definitely applies. When I saw this, my immediate reaction is, wow, that's pretty high. And I remember in college, when I decided I wanted to become a wildlife biologist, I read a similar number. Back then, maybe it was 60, maybe it was 50, but we also didn't make as much money back then. This is about 20 years ago. And I just remember the number being like, okay, that's great, especially because I came from a theater background. When I was in college, I didn't do a college search well. I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I saw my brother enroll in acting school, and it just seemed so fantastic. So I decided to pursue a similar path. But I wasn't as gutsy and as willing to put all of my eggs in one basket. Also, with college, I didn't really know what I was doing. My parents didn't go to college, and back then, they didn't really prep you for college and high school. Like we didn't, I don't remember getting lots of brochures about different universities. So my college search was really limited to the colleges that I knew by name. And those would be Ivy League schools, which are highly competitive, and my local state universities. And basically, that was my approach. I applied to the Ivy League schools that I knew and my state universities. And I didn't get into any of the Ivy League schools. I did get on a wait list for New York University. I'm not sure if New York is an Ivy League school. And I really think I could have gotten into Cornell University, but I had an interview and I didn't prepare. And again, my parents didn't go to college. I didn't know what I was doing. Just telling you guys to prepare for these things. Prepare for any interview that you have when it comes to your professional career. Anyway, I got into a couple of schools, and 2 schools were $30,000, I think a semester or a year, I can't remember. And then one school is my local state school, which was $3,000 a semester, plus I had a scholarship, making it $1,000. It was in-state tuition. So $3,000, I think, was in-state tuition, plus I had a scholarship. And then plus I had the option to stay at home and live with my parents. For a long time, I really regretted this because I saw my friends go off to college, have these amazing college experiences. And because I stayed at home, I really felt like I never got that. I never really made solid friends in college. Yes, I had study friends and stuff, but I just feel like I missed out on the whole college experience. I later made up with it with graduate school and my PhD program. But anyway, the good news is that I didn't have debt because I didn't want to get into a ton of debt if I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So going into the University of Buffalo, I had two majors. I started off majoring in theater because I did love film and I love the idea of being an actress, but I was too scared to, like I said, just go for it. And I therefore decided to have biology as a backup career. Not because I knew I wanted to become a wildlife biologist, but because I thought I could be a physician, a medical doctor, if things didn't work out. Doctors make a lot of money. It's a financially stable career. I knew that there would always be job opportunities. So that was my backup plan. Being interested in theater, I knew the chances of me making a lot of money were rare. Like, yes, people do make it in the industry, and some people are lucky to not necessarily be big star celebrities, but they're constantly working. But I really didn't think that, that was likely. Those people are outliers for the most part. And long story short, I decided to do a study abroad trip and I went to Kenya, and then I learned you could become a wildlife biologist. I'll link in the show notes my full story of how I made that transition. But back to the point of this podcast, when I decided I wanted to become a wildlife biologist and I looked at salaries, I saw a good number and I was like, this is great. I'm going to love what I do and I'm going to get paid doing it. And chances are, if you're an entry-level career professional or if you're in school, you're probably thinking the same thing. You go on the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you see that $70,000 number and you're like, great. Let me just clarify what the $70,000 per year is. So this is the median level. So I'm going to read their definition so it's really clear to you. This is the wage at which half of the workers in the occupation earned more than that amount and half earned less. So if you had, let's say, a sample of 100 salaries and you just stack them up in a line, the median one is going to be the one right in the middle, right at the 50 mark. And a lot of times people use median because in case there's outliers, the outliers, if we use mean, which is average, they can make that mean much higher. So the median is basically the middle level. But still, it seems like there's something wrong with this number. And here's why. Now, let me say that I am not an expert in how these data were collected. I looked into a little bit, but I'm not sure I understand it 100%. But here's what I think is going on. And if you talk to people in this field, they will constantly talk about the low salaries. So my impression is that this number is high, and I don't think other people would disagree with me. And here are the factors that are not explained when you just look up the data online. If you're in undergraduate school getting your college degree and you're looking at these numbers, you think like, okay, great. When I graduate, I'll get a $70,000 job. Or maybe not. Maybe that's 10, 20 years down the line. But I'll start off $50,000 or something like that, which still might be good enough for you. But here's the thing, is that our field is really competitive. And there's something that I call the experience paradox, which means that it is really difficult to get a job unless you have experience. But of course, you need experience to get a job. So you're kind of stuck. You're looking to get experience to get a job, but you can't get a job because you don't have experience. So what are you supposed to do? Well, the answer in our field is volunteer, which I know has its problems. I've talked in past episodes how this can inhibit certain people going into our field, that it creates an advantage for people who come from more lucrative backgrounds. We're not going to talk about that with this episode, but the reality is in our field to get jobs is that you need experience. And this pretty much always means taking unpaid positions. Unless the only caveat I can really see with this is when I worked at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, our lab was also associated with North Carolina State University. And we did have a work study program, meaning that if you were an undergraduate, you could qualify for that program and work in our lab, be given the same type of work that we would give our volunteers who are looking to get experience and be paid for it. But even for paid internships and stuff like that, it often goes to people who have more experience. So I always recommend people volunteer as early as they can. I also have a great episode on creating your own experience that I will link in the show notes if you're trying to volunteer and not able to get anything. A lot of people wait until they graduate to find jobs, which I do not recommend this. Learn from my hindsight. This is a big reason why I do what I do. Even with having a PhD, I still found that I wasn't competitive for some jobs. So I always recommend that people look for the jobs now. But like I said, a lot of people don't wait until they graduate and then they realize they're in the experience paradox. They're like, oh, I have experience. But if they had looked at the jobs ahead of time, what they could have found is that they did need some experience and that there were opportunities to get experience by volunteering in a lab, volunteering with different organizations. I go over this in depth in my Successful Wildlife Professional program, how to do this so that when you graduate, you are in a much better position to get a job. So that's the first thing, is that a lot of people have to volunteer. It doesn't necessarily mean this, but a lot of people think they have to take months of unpaid internships or even years where they're not working. Again, you don't have to do that. There's a way around it. But you will have to probably volunteer. And then the other thing is you'll probably have to do low-paying work. What this statistic is not taking into account, I presume, is the temporary positions out there. Most people, they don't just go to school and then land a job. One of my students has done that, but again, she has been collecting experience while she was in college, maybe even high school too. So she does have experience, but most people, like I said, they're in the experience paradox when they graduate. And even with experience, it can be difficult to get a permanent job. Often people therefore take temporary positions. In the United States and other countries where there's strong seasonal work, here in the United States, we have a winter period and a summer period. And depending on what state you live in, the summers might look totally different than the winters. So here in the Chicago area, the summers, we have reptiles out, we have turtles, we have snakes, we have birds that have come back from migration. And a lot of scientists do their field work during these periods where plant life has returned, animals have returned. And therefore, a lot of work in the wildlife field is seasonal. Therefore, again, another therefore, an organization is not going to hire somebody year round if they only need them working when a certain species of bird is here, which would be May to September-ish. So there's lots of seasonal positions. And again, these positions don't really pay that well. So even if you do have experience, you still might need to take seasonal positions. Even with a master's degree, I talk to people who struggle to get jobs. And in one of my podcast episodes with my friend and colleague, Rebecca Mowry, she talks about taking field positions even after she has her master's degree. Even after she got her master's degree in our lab, she took temporary field assistant positions. And she also worked in non-wildlife jobs as well, I believe, at Starbucks, which I also worked there in college too. I think it's a great non-wildlife job. Anyway, I digress. This might need to happen for years. With this statistic of 70,000 per year, we don't know how many years it takes to get that level. Whereas other jobs, say you're in a financial career, or a more straightforward career, say you're an accountant, you can expect to get a certain salary once you graduate. biology, wildlife biology, and zoology, conservation biology degrees are not like that. And you might have to work several years of getting low paid field positions before you get a permanent position. And this first salary that you get is so important because that essentially sets the trajectory for the rest of your career. My ex-husband, when he started his career in engineering, I think he got paid $65,000 upon graduating with a college degree. And then that sets his baseline for the rest of his career. So anytime he changes a job, he's going to get paid at least $65,000 per year plus. You use that as a negotiating salary. For a wildlife biologist, if you're not getting that $70,000 until later on in your career as your first permanent job, then that's going to be your baseline. So if you were in another career, you might have already jumped that. Like say you started off a little bit lower, but then you worked for a couple of years and you negotiate your salary or you got raises, then that can change. Another thing is that it's honestly not impossible. At least 3 of my students have gotten full-time permanent positions with their bachelor's degree, which I'm so proud of. But it is really difficult. And getting a master's degree is often required for most jobs. And I don't think that the statistic is accounting for this. They did have some information about education. So it says zoologists and wildlife biologists typically need a bachelor's degree to enter the occupation. And then later on it says they typically need at least a master's degree for higher level positions and a PhD for independent research positions. I would argue that that has changed. I think a master's is usually desirable for most positions, even entry-level positions. But you have to make sure it is the right master's. I was listening to a webinar the other day where they were talking about how in graduate school, the education you get might not be the education that you need in terms of research, the research experience you get. So knowing what kind of master's degree you need to get and what kind of research experience you need to get is key. And again, in the show notes, I'll put a list. I've talked about these things before, so I will put a list of some of my podcasts and YouTube videos all about getting a master's degree and getting a PhD. And to just go back to the $70,000 per year figure, in May 2023, the median annual wage for all workers in the United States was $48,000. To me, that sounds closer to what you should expect to get as a wildlife biologist. That's my opinion based on applying for jobs on and off since 2012. In 2012, I graduated with my PhD, and then until 2020, although I was working in a temporary position, so I was on the job market for about 8 years. Well, on and off, because I got my postdoc position and then I started applying again. Now, I did limit myself to jobs in Raleigh, North Carolina. I really wanted to stay there, so I was being more selective, but still, I was shocked at how difficult it was to land a job because they were so competitive. But I was also shocked at the jobs salaries and the salary level at which I was most competitive for. I would say that I was usually applying for jobs probably around the 60 to 70,000 mark. That's where I was qualified. But I also applied for jobs in the 50 to 55,000 level. And those were typically the ones that I had job interviews for. And it wasn't just me. There was another postdoc in my lab at the same time looking for jobs. He was actually more competitive than I was in terms of his CV. He had so many publications, and he ended up taking a job around the $50,000 mark. And then on top of this, this is after we have been in this field for a long time. So like I said, I started in 2023, and in 2020, I was 17 years in the field and qualifying for jobs at the $50,000 level, which is really frustrating when you've worked in a career for a really long time. And like I said, my engineering ex-husband was making $120,000. So big difference. I don't want to dissuade you from this career. It's a wonderful career. But the whole point of this video is to really explain all of this stuff so that you fully understand what you're going into. You don't go in and then get surprises when you're applying for jobs. And some jobs, I mean, it really is amazing, like just how much experience they want for how little pay. I remember one job, it paid, I believe it was $38,000, and they wanted a master's degree and I think a couple more years of experience. But on the other end, there's also really great jobs that pay well, which brings me to my next point. When you look at the pay, they have a table in there which breaks down the pay according to different positions. The one that pays the most are management, scientific, and technical consulting services. So consulting jobs pay the most according to these data. I do believe that. Environmental consultants, though, might not be the kind of work that you want to do. I hear from a lot of people who get really frustrated because a lot of jobs have to deal with development, with land development. So you might be going to an area, assessing the area for endangered species habitat or the presence of endangered species, not find any, and then you essentially give the green light for organizations, for businesses to develop land. Now, not all consulting jobs are like that, but there are quite a few like that. So again, I am here to let you know, like, these are the realities of being in this field. After that is government, which pays $72,000. I would agree with that too. Government jobs do pay well, especially at the federal level. State government jobs, at least in North Carolina, where I was based, tend not to pay as well. They kind of topped off at like the $55,000 range for lots of types of jobs. Research and development in the physical, engineering, and life sciences is $71,000. I would imagine those are positions like Monsanto, which is not really wildlife biology. That's more like industry jobs. And I don't think a lot of people in my audience would be interested in those types of jobs, but for us, research jobs largely take place at universities, which they do put in here as well. They put college, universities, and professional schools next at $64,000 per year. That sounds right. When I was working at professor jobs, those were the salaries. So that sounds like it is accurate. And then the last one is social advocacy organizations, which I'm assuming are like nonprofits, which are at $59,000. And that sounds right. I would say for the mid-career ones, more entry-level jobs are probably going to be lower than that. That really wraps up what I want to say about salaries when it comes to wildlife biology and zoology careers. But I also want to make you skeptical of the type of advice about these careers on the internet. And that was a big reason why I started my own small business to do what I do, because once you're through it, once you get a higher degree and conduct your own research, you understand what jobs are like on the other side. And I felt like when I was in school and even in internships, I understood what the job was like on the data collection level. A lot of my jobs involved me going to the field or going to the lab and processing samples, collecting samples, things like that. But again, those are field jobs, those are seasonal jobs. When you're at a higher level, it's harder to get jobs like that. So it's really important to understand the jobs that you're going to get at those levels, which again is why I recommend people track jobs now. Go to my website and search for the job tracker. I'll put it again in the show notes for you to start tracking jobs and understand what they entail. I want to say one more thing about salaries too, is if you go the PhD route, you also probably are not going to land a permanent job right after the PhD. It's probably going to take you a postdoc. This used to not be the case. Postdoctoral research was mostly meant for academics, for them to gain more experience before they became a professor. But nowadays, it's really common to just go into a postdoc, I think because a lot of people can't land permanent jobs right afterward. So this is also something that they're not considering, is that you might have to work temporarily. And there's also costs in all of this stuff as well. You would be lucky to get a postdoc in your area, so you wouldn't have to move. It frequently doesn't happen that way. Moving costs a lot. You're going to have to pay to move all your stuff, to relocate. All of that stuff is expensive. So that's another thing that they're not considering. And when you look at jobs, make sure you pay attention to if they're permanent or not. I've looked at websites where they talk about jobs working in zoology, but some of the jobs that they listed are postdocs, which means that it's not a full-time job. It's a temporary one-time thing. You do it for a year, 2 years. I was lucky mine lasted 5 years. That's really rare though. It's really just like it's like an internship after you do your PhD. I mean, it's not an internship, but it's like that concept. It's like the bridge to your next career. So that's also something to consider if you're thinking about going PhD route. I just wanted to go over a couple of other things on this website to look out for. And when you're looking at job advice for wildlife careers in general, there's a video on this website, and videos in general, I totally understand that it's important to have like eye-catching photos, but the problem with this is it can give really misleading information as to what it's like to be a wildlife biologist. So here's some of the images that this video had. And also with one of the statements, it says, if you like the idea of working in the great outdoors to study questions like these, so much research has moved indoors because technology has advanced so well. So now we're putting camera traps out there. We're putting really advanced telemetry tags on animals, and we're just not going to the field as much. So a big misconception that people have is that a lot of these jobs are heavy in the field. And it might be that way starting out, but as you progress, then this is no longer the case. I interviewed Christina Lynn a couple of years back, and she talked about how she was 90% or almost 100%, I think she said, in the field when she first started out. And then even just a few years working, she went to the field less and less. And then she said, I believe she was 10% in the field by the time I interviewed her. Okay, here are the images from the video. People holding panda cubs. This is more of a vet or a zookeeper position. Yes, there are biologists involved and behaviorists involved, but again, this is more like a zoo vet world. There was somebody staring at the x-ray of a turtle. That's a veterinary degree. Reintroductions of penguins into the wild. That's also more zoo world because a lot of zoos are responsible for captive breeding programs. You might be a scientist at a zoo, but a lot of times when you're actually working with the animals, even if you're working on animals that are going to be reintroduced to the wild, so you don't want to have a lot of contact with them, it's still going to be the animal care team that is doing the animal care type of things, the diets, the monitoring, maybe some of the behavior work. There are definitely wildlife biology jobs in reintroduction, but with that real hands-on type of work, it tends to be more skewed towards the zoo world. There was a video of somebody collecting venom from a snake. I have no idea what job that's for. There's water quality testing. That's more environmental sciences than it is wildlife biology, but that's still an option for you as a career. Someone weighing a red panda. Again, that's more vet or zoo work. I never weighed animals, just on a scale in a lab in my career. You do weigh them in the wild though, if you're gonna put like a transmitter on them or something, or if you're collecting data. If you're doing bird work, you might capture individuals in mist nets or bats and weigh them and measure them, small mammal work, herp work. So there are lots of areas where you do this. But again, this was a red panda in a lab, so it looked like a zoo. And then somebody looking at stuff under the microscope, which it could be a wildlife biologist, but honestly, I think these were videos from more of like a biotech facility. Even when they talk about what they do, they say zoologists and wildlife biologists study of animals include conducting scientific tests and experiments such as taking blood samples to assess an animal's health. That's vet work. If you're purely assessing the health of an animal, that is monitoring, that is zoo work, that is vet work. That's not what wildlife biologists do. Wildlife biologists, they collect information to answer questions. So they could be taking blood samples as part of the scientific study. For example, I analyzed data from a raccoon study on disease ecology of raccoons. So they definitely collect blood samples, but it wasn't to like monitor the raccoon's health. It was to answer questions about raccoons in relation to specific diseases, not to monitor the individual. And then it says, although the roles of zoologists and wildlife biologists often overlap, zoologists tend to research certain types of animals, such as birds, whereas wildlife biologists specifically study specific ecosystems or animal populations, such as at-risk species. I would disagree with that. Yes, it's more about like focusing on a certain taxa of the animal, but it's more independent of the environment, whereas wildlife biology is more studying the animal in their environment and questions revolving around what it's doing, how it's living, how it's existing. So more of an ecological perspective, but you can even still answer animal behavior type questions in the wild. But a good example of zoology versus wildlife biology is, I like to use the Duke Lemur Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. So if you work at the Duke Lemur Center, you're studying lemurs, but a lot of their questions revolve around like animal cognition. So they're studying how smart lemurs are, or they're studying evolutionary history of lemurs. So those are questions specific to the lemurs themselves. Whereas if a wildlife biologist were studying lemurs, they would be studying maybe the habitat selection of lemurs, or how human disturbance or certain types of disturbance like roads, fires, etc., affect lemurs. And then finally, I want to wrap this episode up with talking about what they think is important qualities. They talk about attention to detail, communication skills, critical thinking skills, interpersonal skills, outdoor skills, problem-solving skills. And those are all great to have. And they give like little sentences talking about those skills, but they don't talk about science. And that is the really important thing with wildlife biology and zoology. They are both -ology careers. Ology means the study of, which means that you have science, which means that you have questions or objectives and you create studies or experiments to try to find the answers. And this also requires data analysis. That is huge. Nowhere in here does it talk about data analysis. It talks about communication skills where they write and present their research, but the huge part of that, you got to analyze the data before you communicate. So that's not to say that those other qualities are not important, but they're missing really the core of the job. And I'm going to link to another podcast in here, which is called What is Research Really? That goes into depth about what science really is. So thanks, guys, for listening. If you have questions about finances, about salaries, you can reach out to me at Fancy Scientist on Instagram. I'm at fancy_scientist. I'd love to know what you guys think about this episode. And use the job tracker to really understand the salaries out there before you fully dive into this career, or so you know what aspect of this career you want to get into. Finances are super important, so don't overlook this. Make sure that you are prepared now, and you can definitely make it work for you. That's what I teach my students in the Successful Wildlife Professional Program. It's not that you have to give up on your dream, but we create a strategy to make sure that you can get what you want. I hope you have an amazing day. Be kind to animals and be kind to each other. And I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye.